He went for a little walk. You should have seen his face. And I wish I could see all your faces. Well, except for you. Woof. Seriously, invest in some bandages of your own, man. Have consideration for others and all that. But I can only hope that on this third day of a monstrous October, you're having as much fun as I am. And who am I, you may ask? Why, I'm your host, Sean Cronenfeld, O ye of the poor memory, and I'm here to welcome you to a look at the 1932 Universal Monster classic, The Mummy.
Death, eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket.
The mummy. Is it dead or alive? Human or inhuman? You'll know. You'll see. You'll feel the awful, creeping, crawling terror that stands your hair on end and brings a scream to your lips. There's nothing on earth like the mummy.
You will not remember what I show you now, and yet I shall awaken memories of love and crime and death.
Now I know his horrible plan. He is going to kill her and make her a living mummy like himself.
And so we come to the introduction of the third of the iconic Universal monsters, and oh, what an interesting beast he is. Our friend the titular mummy comes across, in this film at least, as something of a mix between Frankenstein and Dracula, which is not too surprising, all things considered. To begin with, once again we have a performance from Boris Karloff that elevates everything around it, and gives us a glimpse of what Frankenstein might have been like had Karloff been allowed to portray the monster in a manner more keeping with the book. As with Lugosi before him, Karloff's lidded and shadowed stare speaks volumes all on its own, and makes for some incredibly striking imagery throughout the film. Staring into those eyes really is like looking into a face from hell, and I can only imagine the effect it must have had on audiences at the time, going into the film with little knowledge of what they were about to encounter. Indeed, in point of fact, the classic image of the bandage-wrapped figure shuffling along his way only occurs in the opening of this first Mummy film, and only fairly briefly at that. In the rest of the film, Imhotep, aka Ardav Bey, as he goes by when pretending to be a normal man, and if both of those names sound familiar from a certain other film starring a mummy, that's no accident, looks more or less human, albeit one who has left his face out in the sun just a wee bit too long. Nor does good old Emo need the bandages to be an intimidating figure, as Karloff proves again and again. And yet that opening is also perhaps the single most effective sequence in the film, especially as far as tension building is concerned. So it's no wonder that the particular image of a figure wrapped in bandages reaching out to touch the modern world became iconic among audiences, and was quickly latched onto in the sequels. One of the hallmarks of The Mummy is how it uses silence so brilliantly in order to help build extra tension. Unlike its predecessors, Dracula and Frankenstein, The Mummy actually does feature an active score throughout the film, as indeed in the intervening year, Hollywood had already begun to embrace just what a proper score could bring to the final film. And, as is often the case when a new tool becomes available and in vogue, many films of the time go too heavy in the other direction and overuse a score. All of which means the extended sequences of silence in The Mummy are examples of the director making a conscious choice, and the film is all the better for it. The aforementioned opening, for example, would not be half as effective in terms of building tension were it not for the mostly silent action occurring throughout. Ultimately, what separates The Mummy from his monster compatriots the most is his motivations. Whereas Dracula operates from simple lust and hunger, and Frankenstein, in the movie at least, is little more than a childlike beast, Imhotep has more human and understandable desires and drives at his core, twisted though they may be. Like Frankenstein, he can be seen as something of a tragic character at times, while like Dracula, he hides a monstrous and inhuman nature motivated by lust and desire as he tries to claim the body and soul of the film's heroine for himself. Imhotep is a cool and calculating customer with an incredibly passionate, if unbeating, heart at his core. Also, once again, we have Edward von Sloan essentially playing another version of his Van Helsing persona, right down to the relationship his character has with Karloff's Imhotep. Indeed, this familiarity is probably the Mummy's biggest weakness overall, namely that it feels like a more calculated attempt to latch on to what it worked previously. The Mummy does, after all, come to us from the same writer who also adapted the 1931 Dracula for film. And it shows, especially in the term of the general outline both films follow. Once again, we have the title monster attempting to claim the lead female character for his own, while a pairing of the lead male and a knowing scientific authority set out to stop him. To its credit, the Mummy does put its own spin on things, including letting the female lead sort of rescue herself, which for the time was practically progressive. And the film is never anything less than entertaining throughout, which puts it ahead of, say, Dracula, what with its sagging middle portions. Still, the generally formulaic nature of the Universal Monster series is already beginning to show, and whether or not that's a bad thing will remain a case of personal taste. Ultimately, as with all of the early Universal Monster pictures, The Mummy is filled to the brim with impressive set design, plenty of creative lighting, terrific acting, and an overall sense of atmosphere that remains effective even to this day. I won't say it's my favorite of the classic Universal Monster pictures, but it certainly is among the most entertaining, and well worth searching out for anyone who's never seen it. And so, we've reached the end of another episode of A Monstrous October. In the more immediate present, we have wonders both seen and unseen awaiting us tomorrow in The Invisible Man.